No one gets it. It's all good.
So yes, we are live. I'm sick, but I'm here with my new friend Michael. How are you doing, Michael?
I'm doing awesome. It is a beautiful day. It's supposed to warm up. Where I live right now, it's pretty cold, and so I'm looking forward to a bit of heat.
Are you in California or where are you?
I actually live up in northern Idaho, not too far from the Canadian border.
Oh, oh no way. Ah, okay. All I know is you're 3 hours behind. You're earlier there.
Yeah, we're Pacific time here, so it's a long story. Idaho should be mountain time. Don't get me started on it.
Okay, okay. Listen, before we get going, and if I talk too much, I'm gonna start coughing. So before we get going and talking about your current stuff, what you got going on now, I'm sure you do. I'd like you to go back to your childhood and how you first discovered there's God and religion, and what the family religion was like, if there was any, and talk us through if there are any ups and downs along the journey, all the way up until today. Okay?
Let's do it. So I came from a rough start. Let's just start that way.
Uh,
So a poor family, northern Michigan. I've got the ice in my blood for sure, and my dad got my mom pregnant with me when they were unmarried. And just to put some context here, he tried to persuade her to abort me, and she said no. And so his dad said, "Well, in that case, you're marrying her." And that was the start of that marriage. Not the best foundation of a marriage, and unfortunately went downhill from there. So my dad, by his own admission, was nowhere near ready to be married yet. His dad had some serious problems. He had some serious problems, and he went into this marriage with some serious problems. Anger, there was physical abuse, broken bones. I remember at one point in time, had wrenches being thrown at my face. Like it was a rough way in that way. A lot of yelling. There were a number of different things he did with other ladies, but what really actually put all the screws to this when it discovered what he had done to my sister. And so he went to jail for 10 years for that. And it was a very yucky time. Nominally, we were Protestant at this point in time. We were like that kind of Protestant where they're like, "Oh yeah, we believe in God." Like sometimes we go to church and sing a song, but there was no depth there. At least not for me. I mean, I can't speak for other people's hearts, but in my own heart, there was no depth. And when that went down, I was so hurt and so angry that I just said, "F the whole thing. I don't believe in this. If there's a God and He lets this kind of stuff happen, then I want no part of it." And so to make it worse, it was a small school, again, northern Michigan, right in the middle of nowhere. So everyone knows what happened. And I was a smart kid. And so when I got into fights with other kids, I was able to hold my own verbally just fine. And so they would just then result to, "Oh yeah, well, you're the son of a such and such and such." And then that the labels started going. And so the shame grew. And so there's this ball of pain and shame inside me. And when I finally finished high school, I kind of basically said, "That's it. I'm just getting out of this whole mess. I want nothing to do with this. I'm going to run as far away as I can." Went off to college, and I pursued for a while what I call the Church of Hedonism. I pursued every pleasure I could find. Not very well, as it turns out. Wasn't great at flirting and dating. Like I chased the ladies like nobody's business, but turns out the only ones I could catch were on the internet. And so that addiction kind of set in there pretty well too. And I drank so much alcohol that first year in college. It's a miracle that I made it through by the grace of God alone. But again, like I'm not being rational here. This is just a young man who has no man in his life to set a role model, who's hurt, who's angry. And as I'm going through this time, some things I finally started to calm down a little bit. There's a little bit of distance that sort of come from me and that town I grew up in and all the horrible stuff that happened growing up. And if I'm going too fast, if you have any questions you want to
No,
zoom in,
no,
by
no.
all means, I'm
I'm
happy
enjoying.
to.
I'm enjoying. Keep going.
So here I am in college and I'm starting to breathe a little bit. I'm still chasing ladies, still watching porn, still drinking like a fish. But I'm noticing none of those are really satisfying. Like even when you do manage to score and hook up with some chick, it doesn't really leave you satisfied. I'm trying all the different things I can try. I never got into recreational drugs, praise the Lord. I don't know what would happen had I gone there. And I get all the way through undergraduate and then kind of have this moment of, well, shoot, what the heck am I supposed to do with my life? And my mother, in between, I should point out at this point now, she's now falling herself into a pretty deep well of alcoholism, is her only advice to me is go be an engineer. I think they make lots of money. And so I said, okay, I guess I'll do that. Well, I didn't really like what kind of job I saw coming out of undergraduate. So I said, okay, I'll go to graduate school. Now, let me actually skip one essential part of the story that starts to become a little more prominent. When I was in ninth grade, I worked at Kmart. And I was the lowest rung in Kmart. The guy who has to go collect all the carts in the lot and like do all the physical labor and who everyone else kind of dumps on. That was me. I had that job. But the consolation was there was another dude in the same job that we became friends. And we shared two great loves. We loved the outdoors and we loved to argue. And those two, turns out, go together really, really well. And so we would go on these ski trips, because it's Michigan, like just cross-country skiing through the middle of the woods, or hiking trips in the summer, and just argue. In fact, for a while, the joke was anyone who could make a valid metaphor with a can of baked beans would be declared the winner of that particular argument, no matter what the topic was, just because that was such a great thing to make a metaphor out of. So his name is Paul, not too ironically. And Paul was Catholic. And Paul's family was the only family that I ever went to where there was something different in the household. And so this started in 9th grade. But Paul and I stayed in touch. He went off to school, and he didn't approve the girls and the drinking, but he also loved me through it. Like, he's like, I see you're a hurting young man. And so we stayed in touch. He gets married, starts having kids. And I see this peace in Paul's parents and in Paul's life. And a little piece of me tugged. There's like a little nibbling at the bottom of my heart saying, hey, maybe that's it. And the rest of my brain swats it down and goes, no way. It's got to be somewhere fun with girls. I'm going to keep chasing the girls. And so 12 years, Paul and I knew each other all the way through high school, all the way through undergraduate, and through most of the way through graduate school. And I remember it was the 12th year we knew each other. I'm at his home in West Virginia, and we're going for a hike. And he looks at me halfway through the hike and says, okay, Michael, stop. What's going on? I say, what do you mean, Paul? He said, well, ordinary Michael would have picked apart everything I've said 15 ways since Sunday and looking for any verbal attack you come up with. But all you do is keep asking more questions about the faith. Are you thinking about joining the church? And I go, that's ridiculous. Of course, maybe yes. And I'd actually already started going to mass, not receiving, but going to mass for a few months. And so Paul and I talked, and he got very excited, and he said, okay, let's make a plan. So I go back, right, and I inquire at the parish RCA program, and they're like, nope, not interested. It's too late in the year. You can't join. And I was like, look, I'm not trying to be troubling here. Like, I've read so much. I'm so well informed. I learned so fast. I cannot possibly imagine this. I'm moving. It's my last year of graduate school. I don't want to transition halfway through and then have to restart somewhere else. Like, can you just let me in? No, hard no, not interested. Go away. And it was really very off-putting. And in fact, Paul used the analogy, it's like the prodigal son came home to find all the doors locked. And when he knocks on the doors, no one answers and just, kind of waves something to get lost. And so, okay, fair enough. I then go talk to my parish priest and I say, all right, Father, I heard this thing called private instruction. Are you available? And he says, probably not. How knowledgeable are you? I said, I know a fair bit. And he says, list and order every single prophet in the Old Testament. And my brain just locked. And I'm like, what? And so I started rattling a few off. I got a couple. He looks at me, rolls his eyes, and goes, okay, fine. What are the 4 gospels? I go, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. What's your point? And he's, no, I don't have time. Get out of here. And it was very discouraging. So I went from priest to priest in all these different parishes until I find this old Italian priest. He must have been 75, right near at the age of retirement. And he was just a free-loving spirit. He could barely walk, but he agreed to take me in for private instruction. So we do, and we have a conditional baptism because my childhood was such a mess with the project. We weren't sure if I was validly baptized. And then I come into the church in 2008. And I don't know how many other listeners ever experienced this come to Jesus moment, but you have this idea in your head, cool, I'm joining the faith. All my problems are solved, right? Now I don't need to worry about anything. That issue with ladies, the issue with the internet, that's all taken care of now, right? No, turns out that's not the case. And so now I get to start trying to live with what does it mean to be a Catholic with my past? I've done some stuff. Like, there's some stuff I haven't done, praise the Lord, but there's a lot of stuff I have done. And a lot of stuff I have done has left scars. A lot of stuff that was done to me left a lot of scars. And I didn't know it yet, but I still had a raging inferno of anger in the pit of my soul that I had not yet begun to uncover.
You hadn't noticed that you're a redhead?
You can't tell now for those of you watching the video. I don't have much hair left. That comes from having 6 kids. I joke around that you have enough children, the hair just goes away. But I really didn't. I really thought I controlled it because, if I use the psychology language, I had made a vow, and the vow, and this isn't like a good and holy thing we make to God. This is the idea of a promise I make to myself that later on limits me in my growth. I made a vow that I would never be as angry as my dad. And the funny thing about these sort of vows, they tend to backfire and tend to flip on us. And this vow was deep buried inside me. And yeah, I had a short temper sometimes. I was a bit of a jerk. I knew I was a sharp and a sort of kind of guy, but I didn't realize how much unresolved anger there was. And so we're going through, I finished graduate school. I'm moving to my first job. I'm making good money. And I want to get married. I decided, well, shoot, if I'm not supposed to chase ladies frivolously, and if I'm not supposed to chase internet ladies, well, I want to get a wife. That'll solve my problems, right? Yeah, well, for those of you who are discerning marriage, don't assume that just because you get married, it solves all your problems with lust. That's not how that works. So I get married, And right out of the gate, we get pregnant on our honeymoon. I'll point out that we were attempting to be faithful Catholics, abstained the first 3 nights of our honeymoon because we were still in phase 2 and we really had wanted a little time to not start our family because she had some student loans and some stuff. Like we officially posted our plans to God, said, God, here's our plans. Please help out with taking care of these plans. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Bye. Well, no, that's as God always does when you tell him our plans. He just laughs and says, no, here's a better plan. And so our oldest daughter was conceived on the 4th night of our honeymoon. And we, now, not every time you know exactly when and where, but that was the one. And so here's my wife. I should point out when I met my wife, I'm of Northern Michigan, conservative Catholic guy, very like by the order, by the books, very red. My wife lived in Seattle. She has this like super deep blue river running through her at the point. She just became Protestant because she decided she needs to find a good husband. She can't do that. Very practical kind of decision. She's a very practical lady. So I may as well go become a Christian. So becomes a Protestant, joins this Protestant group that literally believes all Catholics are going straight to hell. And the Catholicism is just horrible. And then she meets me. And then I'll never forget the night she invited me over for dinner at the pastor's house. It was so much fun. I love arguing. And so we sit down and he looks at me, like a little eyebrow thing. I look at him with a little eyebrow thing, right? And we just start. His wife goes, no, stop it right now. I know what you two are doing. I want a peaceful dinner. We're not going to have that conversation now. And he looks at his wife, goes, yes, dear. I was going to say, okay. And that was the end of that whole debate. We had it later on. Don't worry. But my wife converts to the faith because she felt like God told her to be part of a unified household. She didn't want to be part of a divided household. And so before we married, she officially converted, went through a rather unfortunate RCIA experience herself. And she joins the faith. But again, brand new Catholic, doesn't know any of the depth of traditions, the teachings behind the faith here. And it's a struggle. And then she gets pregnant right out of the gate, can't go back to work, has a rough pregnancy. And it really was a very trying time for both of us because I kind of thought I'm married, like this all, it's gonna be a whole new life is to be solved. And she's all of a sudden somewhat incapacitated, having a lot of sickness, a lot of other side effects with these pregnancies. And then we have this baby. I said, cool, at least now. I was like, wait, this is finally it. This was the window I was waiting for. I could finally live my life and not have other problems. And of course, it doesn't work that way. And so as this youngest starts getting older and the anger starts to come out, it's nothing like fatherhood to bring out anger and injustice because kids are full of injustice. And I remember this one particular Sunday. This is not a happy moment or happy memory I share, dear listener. But here's this moment. I'm in mass in the cry room. And this kiddo is just throwing a tantrum. I think she's 1 at this point. And we'd had an additional 2 miscarriages at this point. And also to put in context here, we had 13 pregnancies in 8 years. And so my wife and I are extremely fertile. Of those 13, 6 came to full term and are lovely children that we are now blessed with in our house. So here I am with this 1-year-old, and I was filled with rage. She was just acting. She was being a 1-year-old. And I'm just filled with rage. And like I wasn't doing anything terrible, but I could tell I was on the edge of just losing it. And by the grace of God, I didn't hurt her, didn't do anything like that. But I was just internally a hot mess. And I didn't know it, but there was a man watching me. His name was Ben. And Ben, I believe, was sent as a gift to me straight from God. So the next Sunday, Ben, I don't know him, but my wife knows his wife, comes up to me and says, hi, my name's Ben. I'd like to meet you. I'm like, okay, my name's Michael. I'm happy to do that. He says, this can seem a little odd. And you're under no obligations, but he holds out a flash drive. He said, quite a few years ago, I was really struggling. Another man came into my life and offered to help out. And I don't know where you're at or what's going on with you, but here's a whole bunch of content that really helped me. And I feel I need to share it. On this flash drive is a bunch of talks, a bunch of audiobooks that really changed my life. He said, if it's helpful to you at all, take it with God's blessing. If not, you throw it away. I won't ask again. He said, oh, here's my card. Call me if you ever want to talk at lunch. And I was flat-footed like, okay, thanks. That sounds great. Yep. Don't know why you're into me. No problems here, but sure, why not? And so I think his wife, my wife, the women are always on these sort of conspiracies, right? And so I get home from church. I'm like, honey, the weirdest thing just happened. Like this, I tell her the story. And she just sits there very calmly. She wasn't surprised, which means I think she knew. And she says, well, maybe you should listen to them. And I said, well, that's crazy. And so, of course, I went home back and started listening to him. You may have noticed this pattern. Like, I really like to be difficult. It's something in me. You call it Irish, whatever. I don't know. So I listened to these talks. First talk on this, by the way, was a talk by Deacon Bob McDonald called Dealing with Anger. Subtle, Ben. Anyways, so it's right there. And I start listening and I start realizing, oh my gosh, I still have all this stuff. Like, as I'm listening to these talks, I'm like, I'm supposed to be able to think that way. I'm supposed to be able to live that way, to pray that way. I don't do any of that stuff. Like, I put the checks in the boxes. I go to church every Sunday. Like, I go to confession once a month. I do all the checks. They're there. But I'm not having this other thing. And maybe I kind of thought I was supposed to have that other thing. And so, all right, I decided, okay, we'll do that crazy thing. And I text Ben, because I still kept his phone, or kept a card. And text him and say, okay, fine, let's do lunch. And so he meets me. We go do a lunch. It was a simple lunch. And we probably talked for an hour. And by the grace of God, my heart was open. I actually talked. And I said, hey, here's some real stuff going on. And so he talked and told me some of his story, what had gone on with him. And then he challenged me a little bit and said, hey, I know where you're at because I've been there. But what you want isn't the direction you're going. It's this other direction. It involves sacrifice. It involves growing up, involves forgiving, involves a whole lot of dealing with stuff you probably don't want to deal with. So I went off and I found a therapist. And I said, okay, cool. I've got some issues with child. I've got some daddy issues. I'll just go get a therapist. Well, it turns out finding a good therapist is not trivial. And my heart goes out to all the people in the world who have struggled to find a good therapist. And I don't want to like cast, disparaging comments on the whole profession, but I do know that it is commonly, dare I say, almost universally, a difficult process to find a therapist that's helpful in your situation. So I went through several. And eventually I did find one gentleman who did seem to be able to help. And as we're working through these and we're starting to unpack some of what happened in my childhood, I mean, any therapist worth their salt when I start saying some of the details, because I glanced quickly over the highlights of my child, but you go into some of those details and they're like, yeah, there's probably some stuff there. And sure enough, and he says, okay, have you forgiven your father? And I went, whoa, stop the brakes right there. What are you talking about? Why would I forgive him for doing that? Like that's one of those unforgivable sins, right? Everyone knows that. You don't forgive someone when they do that. That's just what you do. You just crucify them for the rest of their life because that's the right thing to do. And he was a Catholic man, very devout, very Christian, very, very enthusiastic for his love of the Lord. And he was very gentle. And he just said, no, that's actually not what the Bible calls us to do. And it took probably a couple of years. At this point in time, we have 3 children. And we just moved. I'd left my first corporate job, went to another corporate job. And as I'm going through this process, like my wife is very loving, supporting. Through this time, I've been on and off pornography still, clearly just not dealing with these issues inside. And so it's the first thing he had me do is he said, I want you to write a letter to your dad. You're not going to give it to him. I just want you to write it. See what it is you want to say. Very wonderful and horrible exercise. And wonderful for you, horrible to do. And so I did that. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, this is good. All I have to do is just say the words, right? Say the words one time. It's like, some sort of like pixie dust fairy tale story. You say the words, they're off to Neverland. You never have to worry about that problem again. And it's so heartbreaking. I look back at myself, how desperate I was to avoid the love of Christ. And here I am, this young man, still filled with anger, turning from that anger to lust in various ways. Saint Pope John Paul the Great, that's a tongue twister, said that it is possible for a husband to commit a sin of lust with his own wife. And when I first read that struck me to the core. And I was like, the man was brilliant. He said a lot of things that struck me to the core. But that one in particular, when I read that, I said, shoot, I for sure am guilty of that. And so my wife, bless her heart, has put up with many of my difficult ways. There's a lot of them. You get a sample of some of them right now. And I went up to her, said this, and she knew about, at least to some level, of some of my other divergent behaviors online. And so she was a very forgiving and gentle woman. And so we're going through this. We're going through couples therapy. And we found one more, praise the Lord, after many attempts, great marriage therapist for us. And as we're going through this, it just keeps coming out to more and more layers of how angry I am from the hurt that came from my childhood and how much that anger is blocking my ability to love God, my ability to love my spouse, and my ability to love my children. And I remember these feelings of, dear Lord, why is this here? Like, I feel like a cripple, like feeling some sort of emotionally broken here. Like, I'm a human being. I'm supposed to be able to love. And yet this stuff's in the way. Like, come on, just fix it. Wave your magic wand. Like, tell me what sacrament I need to go to get this thing solved. And let's just move on. I don't want this to be this way anymore. And I mean, the truth is, Dave, this is something I'll struggle with my entire life. There are wounds that we never completely heal from. There's a piece of me that will always have sensitivities in some of these directions. I commonly tell the joke that At my Walmart, there's the meat section on one side of the store and the sporting goods and rifle section on the other side of the store. Those are my two favorite sections. Right between them is women's lingerie. And so if I want to walk from my first favorite section of the meat to my second favorite section, the thing that makes more meat, I have to go through women's lingerie. Or I have to walk all the way to the back of the store up by the eggs, go across through the pet food, through electronics, over to paint, and then drop down from paint down into the sporting goods section. And so it takes a little longer. But that's the way that I walk from meat to sporting goods, because I will always have this part of my life, which is I don't need to walk there and expose my brain to that, because there's a sensitivity there. Well, I didn't have that level of sophistication at the time. I still walked at that point. I still walked right through this thing in women's lingerie aisle. And I it was my grandfather passed. My father's father passed. It was a summer, a couple summers ago, 3, 4 years ago now. And God really cranked up the tugging in my heart. He said, Michael, you got to forgive your father. And I'm fighting it like left and right, because that's what we do when we're obstinate, cantankerous old men, is we fight it. And I talked to my wife, and she said, if God's tugging you in the heart, you need to do it. So we drive all 6 kids from Portland, Oregon, back. No, excuse me, it was Boise, Idaho at the time. Boise, Idaho, all the way back to northern Michigan. 30-hour drive straight through. Kaboom. My wife and I just rotate sleeping through the night. 6 kids. That's the only way to do it. So much screaming. So much screaming. Anyways, we get there, and we spent a couple days with my mom. Great. Went down to my grandfather's funeral. Great. In the very end, I talked to my dad. I say, hey, Dad, can we have some time? Well, his mother is watching and listening. Lord love her. She's a very holy woman. And she says, oh, yep, I've got a room for you too. I'll make it available. And so we go home. I put my kids down in the Airbnb we're staying in, drive back over to my grandmother's place. And my dad and I talked. And I still get a little dusty even trying to go through this conversation, but I said something to the effect of, Dad, I don't know if I know what these words mean. And it's certainly not the only time I'm gonna have to say them. But I need to say to you that by the grace of God alone, I want to forgive you. And it stopped him stone cold. And my dad and I didn't have a great relationship even after he got out of jail. It was very, very rough, to put the least, and involved him taking me to strip clubs and whatnot and some stuff like that. And not a godly role model at all. And he said nothing for a second. In my head, I was like, oh shoot, did I screw it up? Did I say the wrong thing? Because he's not saying anything. And eventually he looks at me and says, well, I don't know what to say, except for maybe that even if you mean it, I don't know that I could ever forgive myself. And it sounded real. Like didn't sound like he was putting it on the air at all. And so we talked, and it was the most real conversation I've ever had. And when I finally left, I don't want to say that was my moment where I was just healed, but that cracked the door open to finally getting some of this stuff on a deeper level. And David, I've been blessed with several great mentors throughout my life, men like Ben who've stepped in at key moments and just been there, have offered direction, guidance, counsel, resources, and really just given me a lot of incredibly good things in my life that I never had from my dad. And that moment opened up the door for another great one to step into my life. And also, I say really opened the door for me to finally be able to start to see enough of myself to start to do some of the work. And so I'm not going to twist the camera around, but right over there's my bookshelf. My bookshelf is packed with books, and there's some fun fiction on the top and the bottom. I love Brandon Sanderson, but in the middle, the core of it is just a ton of psychology books, of theological books that I go through these books, and I love these books because every time you find one little nugget that you can go inside in your own heart and soul and make one thing a little bit cleaner, a little bit better aligned to God. And this was about the time in my life where the word surrender, oh, I still hate that word. The word surrender really took a prominent, loud role in my life. And I started realizing there's all these things that it's not just the big things. It's one thing. So I've been free from porn for a few years at this point. And, my anger is at this point way better than it used to be. But now we get to they say that the devil will fight a little bit to get you from 80% holiness to 90% holiness and fight a lot harder from 90 to 95. But that last couple percent, that's where he really digs in the nails and to resist for all he's worth. And sure enough, you start to notice all these little things still, all the anger. And one of the things I started to realize I'm going through this process is how much of a wimp I am as a man. And I kind of drifted, I kind of blamed everyone else. I'd have excuses. Well, I have to do this because my wife won't have sex with me. I have to do this because whatever. And there's all these excuses. And the strength of learning to stand tall as a man and say, no, I will do this right path, not because of any other reason, but because I choose to do it out of love for my creator. And it's not easy. It's not comfortable. It's not enjoyable, but this is the path. And I'm not perfect at it by any means, but this ability to stand up and say, no, this is the way we're going. Whether it's even within marriage, there's a way that a husband is called to lead a wife that is not passive, is not just, it's fine, dear, whatever you want, dear, happy wife, happy life, right? No, that's all garbage. And when we men abdicate our responsibility to provide a direction, to lead our families, to lead our communities, the devil has a field day. If you want to see a woman who's in trouble, look for a wife whose husband is abdicating responsibility, because she's probably, given today's culture, going to try to fill it, and it's not going to work out well for any of them. And so, go ahead.
Uh, well, I'll let you complete the journey. We're pretty much up until
We're close.
today now, right?
We're just about there. Yep.
Okay, finish it up.
Okay.
I got a couple of follow-up questions for sure.
I would hope so. Okay. So at this point in time, I'm going through this journey, lots of transformation. God sends this next big curveball at me. And he says, okay, Michael, time to leave that corporate job. You're going to be entrepreneurial. And I was like, whoa, slow down, God. I'm not the entrepreneurial type. You know, it's like Moses. I can't talk well. Don't send me there. That's not really my thing. And so I leave the corporate work after a tremendous amount of prayer. Oh, it was a painful decision. And I go, the first thing we do is this fencing company that we bought. Long story, but I'll keep it short. I'm not thrilling and I'm not enjoying this. And so it's paying the bills. I'm just being a contractor. I'm the only guy with a PhD out there putting a fence post in the ground, but whatever, it gets the job done. A couple years into this, and we're almost to the present day. And God says, okay, you get to sell that now. He provides a buyer in COVID, and the thing is sold. And my wife and I look at each other, and she is the entrepreneurial type. And she says, I think we should just lean into the entrepreneurial thing. We've had 6 kids at this point in time. And when we move up to Northern Idaho and we launch our 2 online businesses, and now we're both life coaches. And I now have the blessing of helping men on their journey in a parallel way to all those other men help me. And so I'll wrap it up there. We're saying that's where I'm at now. The journey always keeps going. But when I look at what God provided for me to get through all those various obstacles, to be where I am now, and as functional, even though I may look relatively dysfunctional, but as functional as I am, it is such a blessing to be able to help other people on that same journey.
Cool. So, I'm gonna focus on a few family questions. How's your sister doing?
So she has no memory of the event. I don't know if that is a trauma response or whatever, but we've talked about that openly. And she has, I should say, events. They're plural. And so she doesn't know those. She's now married. She has 3 children of her own. She lives in Wisconsin, actually. And so my whole family exited Michigan after that. Like, everyone ran away from that. But other than that, like, she found her way into a Protestant church that she really loves. And I joke, she likes my wife better than she likes me. That's easy. That's not a hard call to make, though.
And your dad, he's still kicking around, and you're trying to have a relationship with him, or what's the idea?
Yeah, so I don't have a lot of relationship with him. We talk once or twice a year. There's really just not a lot of overlap of values at this point. Honestly, I think at this point I would call what he's doing is a slow suicide.
Okay.
He's not really. He did get married again for a brief period, and that fell apart explosively. And at this point, he's just kind of kicking along. When I talk to him, it's shallow, it's empty, and I don't know that he is really open to a relationship. He'll answer my phone calls, and we do talk a little bit, but I don't know. I do go back and forth of whether or not I should put more time into that relationship, honestly, in full confession. And at the moment, I mean, I have 6 kids that are little, trying to build 2 businesses online. Not that that's really an excuse. I just did it right there. I just gave them the unmanly excuse, didn't I? And yeah, I don't know, but I don't talk to him a lot.
Well, it's sad but true that some people end up in hell. Are you worried about his final destination?
I am. If you asked him, he would say he's a Christian. He does occasionally go to this little Protestant church in Michigan where he lives, and we pray for him. When I became Catholic, there were no Catholics anywhere in my family. And so my children and I, we pray for all the rest of our family. And by the grace of God, my mother actually converted some
No
years
way.
after I was
Ah,
married.
ah,
That's actually an amazing story. If we have time for
yeah.
that, I don't know.
Of course, of
We're
course. Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
So when I first became Catholic, my mother said to me, "You must be crazy. You know that they go around saying that bread is Jesus, right? Like that's just so stupid. Like how could you possibly want to be Catholic? Everyone knows they go straight to hell." But she didn't say that line, but it was implied. And so I get married. We have these kids. She gets married. It's her third husband. Praise the Lord. God sent her a beauty of a third husband. And they come out to visit us all the time when you have these kids. And he never was married before and he never had children. So this is the biggest blessing to him. So he's just tickled pink to have children in his life for the first time ever. And he is always asking me questions about the faith. And it sounds to me like these polite questions, like you just ask just to like make conversation. And so I would answer them. I didn't go particularly deep theologically, but I'd answer them. And I didn't know this, but they'd go back and on the plane rides home, they'd be talking and he would say to her, "Oh, we need to learn more. I think what Michael said was so good. I need to find out more about this." So the young man, Paul, his parents still live in Michigan, and they were friends with my mother and my mother's husband. And so they brought it up with them. And so a couple of years go by, and when my mother was in her alcoholism, I would oftentimes get these texts from her, "Michael, we need to talk." And generally, that was a code word that meant I just screwed something up really big, and I need you to help me out of it. And so it's a couple of years into Kevin and my mother's marriage, and I get this text from them. And it's Michael, we need to talk. I'm like, oh shoot, did you mess it up? Kevin's the best thing you've gotten since whatever, and that, yeah, you better not have broken that one up, Mom. And so I brace myself, the old comment, gird your loins. And I pick up the phone and I give her a call. "Hey, Mom, how's it going?" And she's like, "Well, Michael, this may be a surprise to you." My brain goes, "Probably not." And she goes, "You probably don't see this coming, but Kevin and I have been RCA for the last 6 months, trying to discern if we want to join the church." And my brain, like, you get this mental like train that's going in a certain direction. It's like all the brakes and all the train crashes, like, what? Say those words again. Those words cannot come out of your mouth. Not the woman who said what she said to me after I became Catholic. And I said it better than that. And I said, "Whoa, Mom, say it again." "What?" She said, "Yeah, we really think we're gonna become Catholic." I said, "Mom, why?" And she says, "Well, Kevin really, really took to heart all the answers you gave him." And she said to me, "But that didn't work on me. I didn't care about that." She says, "It was really watching the girls live their faith, the simple faith that they had that was so simple, watching their prayers and how simply they lived and how powerful it was." That cut me apart like a knife. And so I had to learn more. And so that year, it was right after Easter, they came out to visit us, and I got to go to mass with my mom, and she received with us all, and it was just
Wow.
such a gift from God, such a
Wow.
gift.
Well, I'm gonna ask you to pray for my mom and my dad and my sisters because I'm the only Catholic. I converted in 2009 by the grace of God, and yeah, things have gone downhill since then. In the family, I won't bore you with the details, but yeah. So I'd appreciate your prayer. Seems like your prayers are pretty powerful.
The prayers of my children are, but I'll pass it on.
Yeah, yeah. Get your kids to pray for me.
Yeah, they're the heavy lifters here. They're like, that's not true. All of our prayers are powerful, and all of us
Yeah,
have so much to bring. And
yeah.
it's so easy to dismiss the power of prayer. I do it myself regularly. I literally just did it right there, and I think all of us could stand to offer more prayers. Go ahead.
I want to give a shout out to my friend Daniel Drazinovich. He's a fellow Canadian up here, Catholic, and he said that porn and lust create anger. So there's a connection. I've watched a lot of true crime stuff. Serial killers often admit that they have porn addiction, and the thing with pornography is it's demonic, and it just it's never innocent, but it gets less and less innocent the more you say yes to it. And so
Yep.
there's always going to be anger, violence connected with this demonic sex stuff. Like I think it was George, who was that old guy? George, do you remember the old time guy, actor? George, I can't remember his name, but anyway, he made a funny joke about he was old, and he made these jokes when he was old, and he said he was talking about on TV there's so much sex and violence, and he said, but at my age there's no difference. It's like it's, it's, it requires any sort of athleticism. That's violence for him.
That's
What
funny.
is that guy's name? I can't remember. My brain is mush, excuse me. But
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say just real quickly, it's so interesting that connection between lust and anger. It kind of brings up what I could use in coaching what I call the mirror principle, where most of the time when I get angry and I think it's what somebody else did, I'm actually angry about something where I failed to do. I'm angry at an injustice I committed against myself, and the
Yeah.
other person's whatever they're doing just simply triggers what I'm already upset about myself. So when my wife rejects me sexually and I get angry about it, I'm actually angry because I realize I failed as a man to live the way a man ought to live, who's
Mm.
temperate and chaste. And that anger and all these big emotions we have that we want to blame our spouses, our friends, whoever, are so much more a mirror that points the finger back into our own hearts and where we're dropping the ball and coming up short.
It's George Burns, by the way.
There
George
you go.
Burns. If you don't know him, you could check out his comedy. He smokes a big cigar when he tells his very dry jokes. George Burns, yeah, check that guy out. But yeah, thank you for that. And the thing about sin is I don't know if you know, but I came into the church in 2009, as I mentioned, and I'd been atheist for 25 years. I was actually calling myself an atheistic Satanist at the end there because it just went darker and darker with my atheism, and then God threw me a lifeline. But yeah, I was very, very anti-Catholic myself, when I came into the church. But a monk stumbled into my workplace, and because I just recently, through reading philosophy, discovered God and became a generic monotheist, in spite of my anti-Christian, anti-Catholic sentiments, I just said, "Well, you worship God, right? You're a monotheist, so you worship God. So, can you teach me about God?" And so he took me under his wing and gave me private instruction. And he took me. The first thing he did is take me to the mass, so I could see the beauty of the worship, because my hunger was to worship this God that I had discovered. And so anyway, a long story short, I got over my anti-Catholicism through the course of this education, and it was actually reading the Confessions of Saint Augustine that melted my heart towards Christ and His Church. And but yeah, we're all on a journey, and I can sympathize with a lot of your stuff. The porn, the lust, and it's horrible. It just really is a horrible albatross around the neck.
It is, and it's one of those ones that just self tightens. And I think, well, so these days there's a tremendous amount of good work being done against pornography without even a religious backing.
Yeah.
Like the medical science coming back with what that behavior does to your brain is just terrifying. Just terrifying how much it twists and corrupts your brain.
It's truly evil, one of the most evil things. And you have to wonder how it's all connected with abortion and divorce and adultery, and
Amen.
it's horrifying.
What's one of the blessings of what I get to do now is there's a number of men that I've worked with that are at different ages, everything from one young man who was 19, who stellar success in every area of life except for his secret addiction. And by the grace of God, he's been clean and sober for quite some time now. Even up to men, I've talked to men about this who are 75 and everything in between. And the principles are the same through all of it. It always comes down to surrender and opening up to love and opening up to healing. And it's painful and it's embarrassing. It involves going through shame and reframing those thoughts we have. And it is such an encouraging line of work. I tell people sometimes I have the best job and the worst job. The best job because I get to when things work well, there's nothing that compares to someone who's gained freedom from some way the devil is afflicting them. But the worst job, boy, there are some dark days in the middle where it gets bumpy and there are tears. I've seen big burly men, like burlier than me, like they look like they're throwing a let a jacket on and get on a Harley, kind of burly, just sobbing as they look into their own past and deal with some of the wounds that they've received for the first time, openly looking at it in their life.
Uh, it's a controversial topic, but it's a Catholic topic that we can't really avoid. So, I want to get your opinion. I myself have maybe a childlike trust and faith in Pope Francis, but a lot of people on the right hate him. So, I mean, I give him the benefit of the doubt, even in the face of headlines that have been twisted, distorted, and that demonize him. I just always give him the benefit of the doubt. And, in my heart of hearts, I believe he's Christian. I believe he's wise. I believe he's a good man and that he's holy, and that he's wrong about some things, whatever. But what's your take on Pope Francis, in particular, when it comes to these issues of, well, sexual abuse? Because that's kind of that at the heart. I mean, it's kind of weird to think about masturbation as sexual abuse, but the Greeks call it self-abuse. That's their actual word for
Hmm.
it.
Yes,
So what
you've
do you
harmed
think about,
yourself.
yeah, what do you think about Pope Francis and the approach that he's taking to these delicate issues?
Let me start with some context. When Napoleon was rising to power, he wrote a letter to the bishops that said, "Dear bishops, support me, put your entire back in the church behind me, or I will destroy the church." The bishops write back a letter saying, "Dear Emperor, you are welcome to try. We ourselves have tried to destroy the church for over 1,000 years, have utterly failed. Do your worst." And I
Good
say this to
strength.
say that the church, from the beginning, was a hospital for the sick, not a
Museum
bastion
for
of people who
saints.
are already holy.
Yeah.
And we have survived many, many scandals, many bad personal choices by people in the papacy, by men in the priesthood, by men in the bishopry, throughout all of time. When Martin Luther posted his doctrines against the wall, the vast majority of them were factually accurate. I disagree with his course of action next, but his assessment wasn't that far off. And so we have to now bring us currently to Pope Francis. I think it's an error to overly look at any single human being. Pope Francis, like myself, is a sinner. Does he do things that are incorrect? I have no doubt. Is it my place to judge them? No. I don't need other people judging me. I don't need to be judging Pope Francis specifically. The teaching of the church remains unchanged. The core teaching of the Catholic Church has not changed and never will change. When I have read and looked at some of what Pope Francis has written, and oftentimes it is vague or left open to a couple different understandings, or often words that would make it more clear aren't put in there. And I don't understand why he is writing these, but I believe that the fundamental teaching of the church remains that way. We've had heresies throughout all of time. There have always been people. The Arianism was so rampant that there were more so-called Catholics who were Arian than not at the time when it reached its peak. And at the time, the non-Arians were thought to be the heretic. It was so widespread. God preserves the bark of Peter through all the storms, not by using saints in the process. And so I actually just recently accepted a client who has same-sex attractions. I don't use the word gay or homosexual because I don't like to apply labels to people for anything, whether alcoholic labels, whatever labels. I'm a human being created in the image and likeness of God. I'm an adopted child of God. That's enough label for me. That said, this individual has same-sex attraction and is struggling. And is struggling particularly in light of what Pope Francis has written, trying to
Mhm.
understand what are his moral obligations as a Catholic to lead his life in a way that aligns with God's teaching and aligns with the yearnings of his heart. And I accepted him because he was in that struggle. And he literally looked at me at the end of our initial call and he said, "Are you sure you want to work with me?" And I said, "Yes, because I see a man in front of me who's trying to grow closer to Christ. Your path is a different path than mine." And I don't know whether or not the exact interpretation of Pope Francis is scandalous or not. I'll be honest, I don't know Italian well enough to be able to parse in the original language. And after that, you're trusting a translator. But I know that this man, when he first, it was halfway through the call, when he admitted he had these attractions to me. And he expected me to yell at him, to get angry, to throw accusations. I could tell his guard was up, his heckles were there. He was almost offensive. "Well, you know that I'm such and such." And I said, "Okay, I too am a sinner. It's a fact. And I sin regularly. I'm striving towards holiness. So are you." And I see when I look at Pope Francis, when I look at that is I take out of it an invitation that all are worthy of love. All are worthy of blessing. We are all on a different path. Is there truth the church teaches? Yes, absolutely. And is there a group in the world right now that is trying to deny that truth? Of course. Do I personally wish he would have made a little more clear of a statement that would have reaffirmed the fundamental teaching? I would have loved that. I'm not him. I don't have his shoes. I don't know why he's writing it this way. He is aware of so much that I'm not aware of. But I do also know that if I look at what does the Pope say and how do I as a lay faithful take it as a challenge to me to grow and become a better human being, a better Catholic, and a better, more holy. And the challenge I take is to say, look, it's easy. I would consider myself to be more on the right. And it's easy for those on the right to respond with anger and accusation. And unfortunately, I'm sad to say there have been ample opportunities, ample demonstrations of that anger and accusations thrown out there. And if nothing else, I take Pope Francis' recent works to say, Michael, your job is to love people, speak truth, but love the person. And when the woman caught in the act of adultery is brought before Jesus, the love and tenderness he shows her. He doesn't get up there and jump in his face like, hey, you woman, you did all that stuff, blah, 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 blah. No. He, first off, gets rid of all of our attackers through a brilliant strategy. I so want to know what he wrote in the dirt. He gets rid of all of his attackers. And then he looks and says, woman, is there no one here to accuse you? He doesn't deny that the sin was there, but he loves her. He protects her from the world, creates a space that's safe for her to heal. And he says, firms the truth, go forth and sin no more. And I look at the recent writings of Pope Francis in my effort to read them and interpret them in a way that challenges me to grow as a similar vein to that seen in the gospel.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Because I don't know if you're aware of the fact, but there's some bitter hostility and hatred
Oh, yes.
towards the person of Bergoglio, as they call him. And there's discouragement. There's even an attempt to, in some quarters, to undermine the authority or the teaching office, or some people resort to, well, I only believe the de fide dogmas, and I don't need to. I can ignore everything else. Well, that's not the case. I've got my handy dandy fundamentals of Catholic dogma always at hand, because the dogmas are important. They're lights on the path in the darkness. But there's more to our faith walk than just those rock solid de fide dogmas. There's whole grades of certainty that we have in the doctrines of the church, and we owe submission of mind and will to everything that the ordinary magisterium teaches. Within reason. We can have, I disagree with the Pope about the jab. The Pope wanted me to get the jab out of charity, and I said, no, thank you. I'm not going to get it. So I'm not a robot. I'm going to judge. I also disagree with Pope Francis about evolution. I don't believe in evolution. I believe the whole universe is about 7,000 years old. So that's a very conservative take that I have on that one issue. But on other issues, I'm very liberal. Like migration. The Pope's big on migration and immigration, and I'm sympathetic to that. So
I think most of these people who get so worked up and are so, I don't want to use the word violently, but I'll say explosively, and the word hatred. I think if I really challenged them, if I really sat down with them, maybe with a glass of beer around a campfire, and I said, look, how does the Pope believe, this papal encyclical actually going to change your life as you lead it in your vocation right now to love your wife, to love your children, to love your community, to support all the above, and to become a holier man? Does that have any real impact on you at all? Because the truth is, most of us are called to live in the now. God has a will for us now. We live in the now. We speak the truth, but it's not my job to worry about what's happening somewhere far away. God's given me this job here. This is my job, and I need to focus on running it. And honestly, it feels a little bit like an indulgence for people to be like, well, I just need to get on the internet and flame other people to make sure that the truth is out there. No, that's not what Jesus did. That's not how Jesus lived his life. And that's not the teaching of the church. And so I think there's a real invitation to humility for a lot of people. And not to mention, on top of that, there's a certain amount of arrogance that says, I understand exactly what the Pope meant to say so well. I mean, I'm a smart dude. And I look at some of that stuff and I'm like, there's so many ways that could be meant. And I don't know why he didn't do it. And for me to assume that seems like the height of arrogance.
Yeah. Have you read, by chance, the 16 documents of Vatican II? And if so, did you like them?
Not entirely.
Okay.
And I have read pieces of them.
Okay.
Like is a funny word here. Honestly, a lot of them, there's so much assumptions built into trying to understand them that I would throw up my hands and say I'm not qualified to fully understand them. I do believe that a lot of Vatican II was, either intentionally or not, misinterpreted in terms of how it was applied, especially through the 60s and 70s. And there's a lot of things that came into the church that do not even seem to be consistent with what was actually talked about in Vatican II.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so
Absolutely. That's a
the
fact.
devil is always prowling.
Absolutely, yeah. Before, I like to say, before, during, and after an ecumenical council, Satan's really active. Before, during,
Yes.
and after. But I had a very controversial guest on. Just for the record, I love Vatican II, and I love Pope Francis. So, but I always interpret everything with a hermeneutic of continuity, and I love tradition, and I love the unchanging truths of the church. But I had a very controversial guest on about a month or two ago. Father James Martin. Do you know about him? Do you have any impression
I know
about
a
him?
little bit about him. Yeah.
What's your impression?
My understanding of Father James Martin, if I'm remembering the correct person, and I'm bad at names, so
Yeah.
is that he is a little bit of a fiery type that's pretty far on the right.
No,
He's the name of the. Oh, I don't
no,
think of a different guy
wrong
then.
guy. This is the LGBTQ priest who's pushing
Oh,
LGBTQ.
oh, then I do not know of him then. Okay.
Google him, and you'll see. If you have a computer there right now, you'll see his
Mm-hmm.
face. Just type in Father James Martin.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Do you know
Okay.
him? Are you familiar with him?
I am not actually familiar with this guy at all. Then I must have had my name switched. Okay.
You see his face?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So anyway, any rainbow flags in his pictures there?
I would switch images. The first one didn't have one, but I
Anyway,
okay. Yeah, there we go.
his mission is to the LGBTQ, same-sex
Yep, I
attracted,
see.
and so it's highly controversial. The hatred towards him is incredible from conservative Catholics, and so I'm impressed that you don't know him. Actually, I'm very impressed by that. But I met him, and I'm the type of person where I understand the faith. I love Christ and His church, so I found out what the church teaches, and then I'm not worried about headlines, controversy, and there's this bishop said this and this bishop did that, and these two bishops don't agree and whatever. I'm not worried about that. I'm really not worried about it. I've never lost sleep over anything the Pope said or any bishop or priest did. Even the pedophile priests or the homosexual priests or whatever, I don't lose sleep over that. I avoid them like the plague. I've met a couple of priests that I think are unrepentant homosexuals. I just avoid them, you know,
Yeah.
and pray for them. But Father James Martin, before I interviewed him, he said two things you can't ask me. One, am I gay? And two, am I Orthodox? And so
Oh,
the impression that I got was that he at least himself thinks that he's Orthodox. And
okay.
in terms of his sexual appetites, I mean, I don't know, but I mean, uh, if I had to guess, I'd say probably he suffers from same-sex attraction or did at one time. That's just the vibe that I
Sure.
get. But I mean, maybe not. Maybe not. Like, I mean, I'm when I entered the church, like I told you, I was anti-Catholic and I knew all about the sexual scandals. And so I've always been sort of cautious when it comes to any priest. Like, is this guy gay? Is he a pervert? Is, whatever. Does he even
Sure.
believe? Because I've met priests here in Montreal that don't believe in the real presence, and they admit it openly.
Hmm.
So I avoid anyone that's you know ostensibly Catholic but actually not Catholic. That's just like I think it was Saint Bernadette of Subaru who said, "I only fear bad Catholics." That's where I'm at. That's where I'm at. So it's a minefield coming into the church. It's a dogma of the church actually that the church is a perfect society. But what that means is not that in this sick fallen world the church militant is puritanical. No, what it means is that all the means of salvation are here, and of course up in heaven in the church triumphant, it is perfect. But here below it's a hot mess. There are wolves in sheep's clothing, as Jesus said, and there will be weeds among the wheat until the very end. Make no mistake about it.
Oh yeah.
So that's a hard thing to navigate. Was that something that you were naive about at any point, that maybe this was a pure and holy church here below?
No, I don't think that was ever my experience. I think we need to look at corruption in two different forms. There's corruptions of somebody else who I've never met, doesn't affect me, and there's the corruption that affects me directly. And I think it's a lot more fruitful to focus on the latter. And so, for example, I told the story when I was trying to join the church that priest after priest was uninterested in private instruction. Our RCA class says no. And that's a real rubber meets the road. I have to deal with it. But honestly, I was such a hot mess in my life that I was pretty sure that everyone's going to be a hot mess on some level. And I think it's very dangerous, David, to get into these spaces where we're like, the word hatred is such a horrible thing. And if somebody is hating, I would invite them to realize they hurt themselves far more than they do anything to the other person. I have Father James Martin right here. I don't know much about him. And maybe he is advocating things publicly that are not in accordance with teaching the church. I would pray for him. I have sympathy for the man, but probably some pretty horrible stuff going on in his past in his life. As a fellow person who has horrible stuff in his past, I have a lot of sympathy for that. I will speak the truth as well, but this idea that the right response ever is to hate and to throw venom and anger, that is just by definition counterproductive on every level. The old line I used to hear is that bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting somebody else to suffer for it. We know where that poison's going. It's in your stomach, buddy. And how's that treating you?
Protestant I listened to on the radio said, when you go through stuff, you have two options. You can get bitter or you can get better. So
Yep.
you could choose. you know, you choose wisely. I just want to say for the record, I do want to say for the record, because Father James Martin was very nice, and I have no reason to suspect him other than the hatred that's being thrown his way. I do give him the benefit of the doubt. I do give him the benefit of the doubt that he's a good and holy Orthodox Catholic trying to minister to those who are vulnerable, those who are on the margins, and that's what Pope Francis's pontificate is all about. And I think there's a certain stamp of approval that Pope Francis has given to Father James Martin for his work that he's ministering to those who suffer from SSA. And so, I mean, I sincerely, from the heart, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. I want to make that
Sure.
crystal clear. I want to make that crystal clear, despite my paranoia about this guy's gay, that guy's gay, whatever. Even if you do suffer from same-sex attraction, I love you and I'm praying for you, and I know it's not easy to overcome sexual perversion. It's just not easy. And I thank God that I wasn't born, uh, with worse proclivities
Well,
myself.
I, I have to speak somewhat carefully here because to not violate confidentiality, but I've had several clients who suffer with same-sex attraction. And while all sexual wounds, psychologically speaking, are very traumatic and very traumatizing, it's interesting to me as I've watched, in a similar vein, I mentioned in my own story that my father's sin was oftentimes thrown at me through high school. This particular one, without exception, every man who has this attraction has had multiple times in their life where deep shame has been thrown at them for it, just for having the attraction, not even about the actions. And it's a tremendous wound for many of them, particularly with their fathers. And so I see as well that if somebody does have these attractions, how easy it is for even a well-meaning parent to just inflict such an amazing amount of damage in their hearts that they linger. And that's true for all of us. But this one does cut hard, and and it's almost like within the religious conservative circles, it's an okay one to bash on. Like,
Yeah.
there's a young couple in the parish that are imminently discerning marriage, and let's just say hypothetically, they go up to receive communion. How do I know that they're in a state of grace? I know myself at that age with a girl that looked good, I would not have been in a state of grace. And so, is it my place to judge every single person who goes up to receive the sacrament? Say, I think you are. I think you're not. I mean, how silly! Not to mention how prideful. Maybe I need to start with myself in that moment. And
Mhm.
I, I never want the truth of the church to be changed or spoken of poorly, but the lack of charity in so many people right now about this topic is just heartbreaking for me.
Absolutely. If you go to the Vatican website, there's a biography of the Holy Father, Francis. You don't need to go there, but it's
Yeah.
something worth reading. And there's a phrase there, which I find very challenging for those of us who are prone to criticize or to judge. He says, um, okay, I'm just going to read you one paragraph if you don't mind. He says, "My people are poor and I am one of them," Pope Francis has said more than once, explaining his decision to live in an apartment and cook his own supper. He has always advised his priests to show mercy and apostolic courage and to keep the doors open to everyone. The worst thing that could happen to the church, he has said on various occasions, quote, is what Lubac called spiritual worldliness, which means, quote, being self-centered. Yeah. And when he speaks of social justice, he calls people first to pick up the catechism to rediscover the Ten Commandments and the Beatitudes. His project is simple. If you follow Christ, you understand that, quote, trampling upon a person's dignity is a serious sin. So that's the paragraph that really
Mhm.
struck me, because this idea of trampling upon a person's dignity. Um, I mean, has Pope Francis ever been on the internet? Because that's pretty much what it's all about, is like trampling on the dignity of this person over the most trivial of matters. I disagree with you, therefore you're X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
And the harsh language and the trying to cut to the core with biting, scathing criticisms. So I've since Pope Francis came into power, I've tried to borrow from his gentle touch with people, and how to love them in spite of our differences, and to see Christ in them, and to above all not to trample on their dignity. It's a big challenge.
It's a huge challenge, and it's a huge challenge for many reasons. Number one, that you, like me, like all of us, are extremely selfish, and so that's a hard starting point. But number two, we live in a culture that celebrates selfishness, that
Mm.
celebrates crushing
Okay.
other people. I mean, back in the time of the Roman gladiators, they would like throw these people in there to fight lions and watch them get ripped to shreds. And the moderns will be like, "Oh, that's so barbaric! Could you ever do that to a person? I'm gonna go flame somebody on the internet right now about that." And I'm like, it's so much worse. Peterson, I love Jordan Peterson. He talks about how in between men, disputes ultimately devolve down to physical aggression. There's always that physical aggression. But between women, the analog is character assassination. And see, physical violence doesn't scale very well. Like if 1,000 people flame me online, I can't go punch all of them. It's just not practical. But character assassination sure does. And character assassination scales infinitely with the internet. And so it makes total sense to me. We see a total new type of predominant abuse of another people coming through character assassination. Now, that is by no means solely the domain of women. It is that is that women do not have the option for the physical power. So in an isolated environment, that's what it devolves to between them. But by all means, I can assassinate your character or whatever. But it scales infinitely with this. But that's not new. Where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. Like there's always been sin. People always trample on each other's dignities. Like that has been the human experience. That happened ever since Adam stood by while Eve took that bite of that stinking apple. Like that has been the story. And people want to act as if somehow that's new. I'm like, no, not really. Like it has always been the case that the mass of humanity through all of time was deeply sinful. The bright star that sets us apart is Christendom. If you look at the total history of the world, people get all up in arms over how amazing this country is or democracy and how we're post-Christian, we don't need it. Outside of Christendom, there is no love and mercy and justice. Look at what the world was. Every single corner of the world prior to Christendom, what we would now call barbaric. They shredded people, literally, for the fun of it. And then we stand up here and say, oh, well, okay, fine. Maybe something happened back there around 0 AD. We're taking date or year off of it that maybe had some impact. But now we're beyond that. So we shouldn't have these problems anymore. No, humans are humans. We have still the same sins, the same fallen temptations. And it's one of the great things I get to see with coaching. Like I have worked with some high profile individuals, and they have the same problems. They still put their pant legs on one leg at a time. They're still tempted every time a beautiful woman walks past.
Um, we are going to wrap it up. I'm enjoying enjoying meeting you and hearing your insights and your experience and your wisdom. I just want to mention very briefly Saint Faustina and the Divine Mercy and how it wounds Christ when we fail to accept the mercy of God. You know, when
Yes.
we fail to recognize it, we fail to avail ourselves of it. It's wounding Christ. We're re-crucifying him. Like our sin is one thing. Okay, our sin is evil. But Christ said it's worse. What's more painful to him than our sin is our reluctance to see the mercy of God and to avail ourselves of that mercy. So I think this is where we'll wrap it up, and I'll ask you to sort of reflect on that. And I'm thinking about your father here. I want him to forgive himself. I want him to go to heaven. So you don't need to focus on that yourself. I'm just letting you know why
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the mercy of God. You know, there are many such cases. Your father just is a touching example of that. But what would you say about the mercy of God, and how can we just surrender and avail ourselves of the mercy, even though we have the habit of not wanting to forgive ourselves?
I'm gonna come at this from a little sideways angle. The ancients talked about 7 deadly sins. Many people have read this. The worst in every description, every book, was pride. And the reason why is it's so sneaky. It covers itself. Like you don't wake up in the bed next to a different woman who's not your wife and be like, huh, I wonder if I'm gripped with lust right now. Like you don't find yourself shaking your fist in the air and hearing the loud words echo off the halls and say, I wonder if I'm struggling with anger right now. But pride cloaks itself. And I actually think the greatest sin we live in right now is a sin of pride. And it's become popular to rage against lust. But the real danger, and always has been the greatest sin, is pride. And as it applies to mercy, to refuse to accept mercy, to refuse to be open to mercy, is in essence a statement of pride. I'm too good. I don't need that. If I actually chose to accept that, I'd have to first acknowledge that I need that. And oh, I don't like that. I don't like the feeling of me saying I actually do need that mercy. And then it loops on itself. And so this is what I call there's like this looping business where if I can persuade myself I don't need it, then I feel better about myself, and then I truly don't need it because it's a self-affirming thing. Does that make
Uh,
sense?
uh,
Whereas if I persuade myself that I do need it, if I humble myself and open up, then oh my gosh, I'm an even worse hot mess than I thought. I probably need even more grace. Oh, I really don't like that. Like this is why pride is so tricky. And I think when I look at we tie almost all this together by saying I am desperate for the Lord's mercy. And I know that I am a horrible, horrible sinner. I'm not trying to be dramatic when I say that. I mean that literally true. And I am so desperate for that mercy that I don't dare deny it to someone else. Because if you go back to the fundamental prayer that our Lord taught us himself, there's a line in there that if you are hating on somebody in the church, I invite you to stop praying this prayer. The line reads, "Forgive us as we forgive those that we have like that were indebted to us." My brain just skipped there for a second too. Anyways, if you are not in a spot to forgive others, don't pray that prayer because then you're inviting that level of forgiveness for God. And the truth is, David, all of us, far right, far left, I don't care. We're all in desperate need of that mercy. And I think I would agree with Faustina's writings entirely. And I would even go a step further and say, because when that pride sets in that allows us to believe we don't need the mercy, then we're in even worse shape than we were before. And that's going to be even more painful to Jesus than whatever the first offense was.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for taking the time. I'm sorry that I'm sick. God heal me. I'll count on your prayers to heal me.
Amen,
But
brother.
you're gonna come back. I hope you're gonna come back and talk to me some more about your experiences, your wisdom that you've gained. This is not to give you a big head. You know, what do you have that you've not received? Well, you got your sin. That's about it. You know, everything that's good that you have, you received from the Lord. So we can encourage each other where the grace abounds because it's grace, right? So we don't need to
Amen.
feel shy about acknowledging, if you have certain gifts and, a certain intelligence that you have, and certainly a lot of experience and wisdom that you've allowed yourself to be instrumental in the grace of God in your own life and in hopefully in a lot of people's lives. So I appreciate that.
Amen. I regularly say to all my clients, you would not believe, David, how often God moves powerfully. And I'll say, you should probably read this particular psalm, this particular Bible verse, and they'll read it. And the next day, something will happen that refers directly to that. They come up to me and said, Michael, how'd you know? And I said, I did not know. I know nothing. That's coming from upstairs, man. It's all upstairs. There's nothing good coming from me except for just when I managed to barely squeak out of as much yes as I can get out.
Yeah. Amazing. Great to meet you. So I always ask my male guests to invite their wife onto my podcast, and I've had a couple on.
Yeah.
But if she's not too shy to come and share her side of the story, I'd like to hear her side of the story. But extend the invitation, but there's no pressure. I always ask. But take good care. Keep in touch, and do pray for me and mine. I enroll all my guests in a perpetual mass. So you and your family,
Oh,
parents,
nice.
siblings, children, living or dead, they're getting the graces of the Mass every day till the end of time.
Amen. Amen.
So
That's
just
awesome.
just add me to your prayer list, and I'd appreciate it.
Will do. Will do.
Take
It's been a
good
pleasure
care.
talking to you today as well.
Yeah, it's been amazing meeting you, and we'll keep talking to each other. I'm booked solid because of Pod Match. I'm booked solid till Christmas, but in the new year, I hope you come back. If you're not too busy, I hope you come back and talk to me again. Okay?
Let me know. I'm always open to it.
Thanks again. In the unity of prayer, my brother.
Amen.
God bless. Bye bye.